All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank y'all for taking the time to be here. As I say before any presentation, you could be anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with me, and I greatly appreciate that. Um, a little bit about me: I'm a 13-year music educator, um, primarily band, general music. Got my PhD from Auburn University. If you look on the screen, father to a pretty awesome 4-year-old now. I said three, sorry, old slide. And my voice, if you notice, I have a bit of a raps to my voice, in addition to being a dad, band director, musician, and overall dope guy. I also coach varsity basketball. So for the last 2 days, I've coached about 6 games and somehow gotten sick. So I have a little bit of a flu symptoms going on, and I can hardly speak. So please forgive me if you see me just stop the presentation halfway. It's because my voice is gone. About 11 o'clock last night, I text Kat and I was like, "Hey, I don't know, my voice is struggling." So if you can bear with me, I'm gonna try to power through because I want to leave some time for some dialogue because I believe that's where the music happens or the magic. Excuse me. So the title, Meeting Our Musical Code Switchers. In this presentation, we will discuss strategies and ideas for finding and supporting the musical code switchers in our traditional music ensembles. And we'll also discuss ideas and strategies to leverage their talents to inspire other students to become musical code switchers. I promise that's the most I'll ever read. The rest of it will be a lot more uh, open and just free dialogue. So, what is a traditional ensemble? Based on literature and also my dissertation, I'm defining a traditional large ensemble as band, choir, and orchestra. Now, in my region, it's really band and choir. So, therefore, that's why I have the big three ish, because orchestra is not really big where I am in Auburn, Alabama. I know if we go 45 minutes across the line to Georgia in Columbus, orchestra is there. And in Auburn, we do have a youth orchestra that is organized by the university. But for the most part, in my area, and I'm gonna go on record and saying throughout the South, the big three in our field is band and choir. And when I say band, I'm talking about concert band, marching band, jazz band, etc. And we are, as music educators, we know how those class functions. Traditional band literature, very teacher led. Classical music, traditional band literature, everybody learns an instrument, and they're perpetuating this model that was developed in the early 1900s that in a lot of ways, if we're being completely honest, may not be the most relevant things for our students. So what are or who are the musical code switchers? And I told a fib, this is the last big slide that I would share. A musical code switcher is an individual who has a broad perspective of musicianship and create music through multiple formal and informal approaches. So although little Susie may be in your class and she may be an outstanding flute player, on the weekends, little Susie may indulge in creating musical tracks in EDM. And at nights after she practices her flute, she might be a DJ at the youth center. And what we find is the experiences for these musical code switchers is not always addressed within the confines of our classroom. We don't always give these students a voice and the ability to share what musicianship is to them in our traditional ensembles. I talk with my hands, and it's funny because you guys can't see my hands right now, and it's very frustrating for me because I'm here waving at myself. Um, anyway, so we don't always give these musical code switchers with these talents outside of what we do in our traditional ensembles a chance to display their true musicianship. Um, and the beauty of it is there's many ways to make music. It's not one thing, and it will never look the same for every student. Um, I tell the story all the time. When I was in high school, and my best friend right now, who is my partner on the Purpose Addicts podcast, is in the room, and I don't even think he knows. But at the age of 16, I got offered my first record deal as an artist. And what was amazing to me is, or what is amazing to me now, as I look back, I was a rapper. I was really good, I think, if I have to tell the story. I had all this stuff going on outside of the band classroom, but I never had the opportunity to share it with my peers within class, or even the opportunity to share it with my band director. So here I am, 40 years old. Well, excuse me, 37. Why am I adding 3 years? I'm 37 years old, and I've been living this secret life, or I was living this secret life when I was in my traditional ensemble. And a lot of our kids live in this space. Um, Going to the next slide. So, the beginning of my realization here started with this young man with the arrow pointing to him. Now, I did teach the other young man, but the one with the arrow was kind of part of my evolution and my growth in discovering the non-traditional, or excuse me, the musical code switchers. This young man is now a sophomore at Alabama A&M University. He received a music scholarship to perform in the marching band, and he's a percussionist. But when this young man was a sophomore, he came in the classroom with an iPad, and he had headphones in, and I don't remember exactly what was going on in the class that day, but he was in the corner just jamming, and I listened, and I said, "What are you listening to, bro?" So, and he played his headphones. So he was a producer. And not only did I learn a lot about him, but I learned a lot about just the iPad and GarageBand in general, that you can really produce good sound quality music on GarageBand. So after learning about this, I went out and bought an iPad, and then I also interviewed him and just asked him some questions. And at the time, I was in school, so I was doing a research paper, and it was on this particular topic. So ask some questions about what he did on the side and how he did his music. And from that study, I learned three things about this particular student: that music was a passion of his. He was very passionate about music. And although I do go out my way to learn about my students and what they like to do in their own time in music, um, a lot of people don't, but there's that connection where what we do in class is equally as important, or what he does outside of school is equally as important to me as a band director. And he knows this, and I've created this rapport with my students over the course of my 13-year career. The other thing I learned from this interview with him, which is contradictory to the way we are trained in the academy and coming up. I know many of you had to do a recital to get your bachelor's degree, and I can remember throwing up before in a trash can just because of the nerves. He focused on functionality over virtuosity on a music instrument. So instead of perfecting any one aspect of his music making, he was learning a bunch of different things. He knew how to work Logic, he knew how to work Reason, he knew how to work GarageBand, he knew how to functionally play the piano to create chords, create bass lines. He knew how to work drum machines. Whereas a lot of kids in our ensembles, a flute player is a flute player, a sax player is a sax player. They don't really get the time to experiment with different types of instruments and different things. And the last thing I learned, that in school music learning impacts his outside music activities. And that was something that has always been a goal of mine, that as music educators, our goal is to create lifelong musicians. I think that gets lost in the sauce so many times, that we get focused on ones, we get focused on living up to the expectations of what this music education thing has been taught to us, but we forget that at the end of the day, we want little Johnny, little Susie, and Taekwon to be able to create music independently without us. So, little story the other day, and I work with Auburn University as a cooperating teacher. So I get a lot of interns and student teachers. And this past semester, I had a young man who was a saxophone player, and he interned with me. And he spent a lot of time with one of my saxophone players, just training them and doing private lessons through this whole pandemic. And the other day we had a conversation, and he's gone now. He worked with him in the fall, and he left. So now he was there in the spring. Now it's the spring. So he called me the other day. He's like, "Hey, how's Ruben doing?" And I said, Ruben's doing good. And then he persisted in telling me how well he was on the saxophone. So he said, how has he improved? I said, well, Ruben's in class and we've been playing piano. And my intern quickly was like, wait, what happened to saxophone? And I just said, dude, we're in the middle of a pandemic and Ruben wanted to learn piano. So we worked on piano this semester. And part of that approach is illustrated in this book that we have, or that we have just had the privilege of co-authoring, where I talk about our Red Day, White Day project, how I blended modern band instruments within our classes. And, although Ruben really had progressed as a saxophone player this year, he told me that he wanted to work on piano. So we spent that time in class to bring in his outside experiences. So, looking at the clock, I have about 10 minutes, and we're going to fly through just the supporting and leveraging these musical code switchers. So, how do we leverage, or how to support first? Supporting these musical code switchers, it starts with challenging everything about of our experience, um, and the way we have been taught to approach band. I believe that our experiences greatly impact everything about our teaching. And once we truly get past our own experience and begin to focus on the needs of the students, is when we begin to break these barriers down and begin to view music education in the scope of our traditional ensembles differently. Very key to this, in my opinion. Um, don't simply accept their talent, accept their music as well. It's very easy to find out about the kid that plays bass guitar or the kid that plays piano, and then immediately throw a jazz piece or find a concert piece that incorporates piano or bass guitar. But how can we engage with what they do and how they do it on their own time? Which leads me to the third thing, is create spaces for them to utilize their talents authentically. As I just mentioned in our last slide, if I knew there was a kid that played bass or that produced music, instead of saying, trying to do it in a way that made sense to me, I would say, all right, if you produce music, you now have the opening set at our spring concert. I want you to set up a track list, and I want you to play your beats or whatever it is that you do before the concert band goes on. And then in between, as we're transitioning to the symphonic band, I also want you to play a set, and finding ways to authentically use what they do, how they do it, and their music, and taking it away from our scope of being in control, and kind of dictating how we implement our musical code switchers. How to leverage, the keys to leverage, and this one was kind of a lot more straightforward. First is leverage their skills to teach. One of the cool things about kids is that they're very open minded if they're allowed to be. So if Johnny is in the class and student two sees him over there creatively making music, it will naturally intrigue the other students around them. And now you have an opportunity where we're authentically blending in informal music learning, and students are finally having the opportunity to gravitate towards a different style of learning music. So leverage their skills to teach. If you have a student that's interested in a particular style of music or has a skill, have them bring it in, and then have them teach others if you have the resources and you have the time. The other way is leverage their skills to learn. As music educators, we should be at the forefront of learning, and we should be continually growing as educators, as musicians, and as people. And that was, for example, with Malik and his garage band story. Once I tapped into what he was doing, I was able to pick up a new skill and learn how to create music on GarageBand, and use it effectively. So I feel like the time has flown, but I've made it through the presentation. So at this point, I would like to open the floor, and I'm going to stop my screen share here. I would like to open the floor to questions, if that's okay.
I wanted to ask you about like, okay, so we talk about code switching a lot with like student identity, right? Like we talk about like how code switching happens a lot with our students who like have to be, you know, like straight in certain spaces and queer in certain spaces and like other sort of identity code switches. So the solution to that is often to like incorporate or find ways to integrate very much into like all environments. So like would you say it's similar sometimes with students who code switch musically? Like, do you try to integrate musical components into your band, your orchestra, your chorus, like any sort of ensemble?
100%. But I think the key is you the key with integration is that it typically tends to lead us back to what we're comfortable in. And it pulls us out of that space of drawing out and leaning on the student's experience. You see what I'm saying? Like, for instance, just by a show of hands, how many people in the room, this is your first time at the APME conference? Sweet. All right, so let me tell you what's about to happen. You picked up all of this information and you've heard so many great things. My first time at the conference was 2015. And when I left, my face was literally on fire. I went back and I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I went back and I started a pop ensemble. Two things started happening. One, I started teaching music theory, which again, I leaned it back to my understanding. Two, I completely missed what the students actually wanted to do. And these particular groups of students wanted to do more of a praise worship type of band. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So sometimes it's not about the integration as much as it's leaning to what they do and trying to figure out a space for them and then blending what we do around what they have going on, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
No problem. That was a great question. You know, it's like when you talk to people about popular music especially in traditional settings, they say, yeah, we're all about popular music education. We play the popular music at our spring concert for the very last piece. And, you know, you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So we have these artificial ways of how we implement these things differently. And it's never, and me and Steve Holly, he's not here, we talk about this all the time and it's a loaded word, but it's never really and truly authentic to the experience. You know, if we're going to incorporate popular music, one of the last things we probably want to do is put sheet music in front of the kids. But that's what we tend to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Do other people have?
Please, I love questions. I feel so weird being on this screen and not be able to give people a fist bump virtually. Please.
Thanks, Shane, for your wisdom. Chris, do you want to grab your iPad back? I don't want to steal it forever.
Don't steal it forever.
Anybody in virtual land? Go ahead, Andrew.
Shane, this isn't so much a question. I have to split actually in a minute. Speaking of Steve Holly, I'm going to be presenting with him in a minute, but cool. I just wanted to say, I'm really going to take away from this, this whole idea of leaning towards the students versus leaning it back towards me, because I think I've been guilty of that very thing on a lot of occasions. So that's something really important that I'm really going to take with me as I continue to try and inform and reflect on my own practice.
Thank you.
So I really appreciate that, and just thank you for sharing your experience with us today.
No problem. And that's a continual thing, guys. Me, it's 2021, so 6 years in since I've had this revelation. I struggle with it greatly. Like, as I said, I'm a cooperating teacher for Auburn University. And one of my biggest fears every semester when they send me 20 practicum students is that I just don't look like a quack that's out here having fun with popular music. It's a very awkward, it's a very awkward space because you will be the oddball. But I tell people this all the time. I would much rather be the oddball that's reaching my students than the person that's going along to get along just to keep up with what you tell me I should be doing. I'm perfectly fine with that, being that oddball. So appreciate your honesty and appreciate you being here, Andrew.
Thank you. I hate to have to split a couple minutes early, but thank you so much once again.
No problem.
I think that's it, Shane. I'm going to try working on the audio for the last minute. I don't see any other questions in the chat.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.